Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Wishing everybody a ksiv v'chsima tova and a good shore, because we're starting Masechta Rosh Hashanah. We're starting Masechta Rosh Hashanah, which talks about Rosh Hashanah. And today, in today's Mishnah, we're going to describe that there are four different kinds. That there are actually four different Rosh Hashanahs. Obviously, we have our Rosh Hashanah, which is the Rosh Hashanah for the years, but there's different Rosh Hashanahs for different things. So, we're going to learn a Mishnah about that, and then we're going to get into different nafkaminas, primarily around kings, about which Rosh Hashanah is for kings and what the implications are around that. At one point, we get into a little bit of a complicated sugya, but it's really just one line of Gemara. But one line that it's like an iceberg line. But alright, friends, let's go weiter, yeah? Alright, let's jump right in. So it says in the Mishnah, Ibar Rosh Hashanim Heim, that there are taka four Rosh Hashanahs. Okay, what are these four Rosh Hashanahs? Be'echad b'Nisan, Rosh Hashanah l'melachim v'leregalim. So on the first day of Nisan, so of course we think of Rosh Hashanah as the first day of Tishrei. That's just one of four Rosh Hashanahs. The first day of Nisan is Rosh Hashanah for kings. And the Gemara is going to explain what's the nafkamina about Rosh Hashanah for kings. What does that mean? Why is that important? But it says the Mishnah that on the first day of Nisan is the Rosh Hashanah for kings. V'le regalim, as well as for the Shalosh regalim. We will get to the nafkaminas over there on Daf Daled. Bechod be'elul, on the first day of Elul, Rosh Hashanah l'maiser behema is Rosh Hashanah for Meiser Behema. And what that means, that and this came up somewhere, I don't remember where, maybe like in Shkolim or something, that what this means is that, well, if you have animals born before Elul, and you have animals born after the first of Elul, well, when you're separating Meiser Behema, which we actually learned about in the other day, in Masechta Beitza, that Meiser Behema, 1 out of every 10 animals you bring to the Beis Hamikdash and offer as a korban. So, when you are separating Meiser Behema, so let's say you have 100 animals that were born after Elul and 100 animals that were born before Elul. So, you're going to have to take 10 animals from the post-Eluls and 10 animals from the pre-Eluls. You cannot simply take 20 animals from the pre-Elul flock and say, well, that'll be my Meiser Behema for all of my animals. No. Once, right, that Elul, the first of Elul is a cutoff, and you take 10 from the 100 from before Elul, 10 from the 100 from after Elul, and that is that. So you can't separate Meiser Behema from 1 year, or for 1 year from the previous year, and that is the cutoff there is the first of Elul. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Omer Be'echad b'Tishrei, whereas Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon disagree, and they say that the first day of Tishrei is the cutoff and the Rosh Hashanah for Meiser Behema. Be'echad b'Tishrei Rosh Hashanah l'shanim. So on the first of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah for the years, right? The new year is on the first of Tishrei, and the Gemara is going to explain what exactly that means. V'lishmitin, and for Shemitah, of course, we're right now in a Shemitah year. That Shemitah year began on the first of Tishrei. After Rosh Hashanah, it was already Shemitah now. U'liyovlis, the same thing would apply for Yovel, which we don't do nowadays. Lintia, for Orla. Very, very interesting, Lemaise. Do you even know how interesting this is? I probably don't even know how interesting this is. But there's an nafkamin I'll get to in a second, which is that for Orla, what's Orla? Orla is that when you plant a fruit tree, for the first 3 years, you can't eat the fruits. So that, the Rosh Hashanah there is the first of Tishrei, which means that if you plant a fruit tree in Elul, so then Memele, when Tishrei comes, it's already 2 years old. So Kili, you plant or 1 year old, however you're going to calculate it, I guess 1 year old, right? So you plant the fruit tree in Elul. And then comes Tishrei a month later, and already it's completed its first year and it's on to its second year. The reason why this is extremely interesting is I was actually talking to a friend of mine who's a winemaker, and I think maybe my father asked the question, but how do you deal with orla, right? Let's say you're a winemaker and you want to open a winery. So if you plant your vines, if you're going to be starting a vineyard and planting your vines, assuming that you're not buying them from somewhere else, but if you're going to have your own vineyards and you're going to be planting vines, well, you have to wait 3 years until you can use the fruits. So he said, well, one thing that you can do is that you could plant the vineyard in Elul, and then already comes Tishrei, you're already 1 year in, and it's 2 more years. He also said that the fruits, that you're not really going to want to use the grapes from very young vines anyways, so orla doesn't really interfere with that much on a practical level anyways. But very interesting to think about, farmers, and it was interesting to hear about it in the context of a vineyard, that, well, what you could do is around orla is, well, you can, make sure that you get it planted already by Elul. You don't want to wait until after Tishrei to plant your vineyard, because then you're going to have to wait a whole another year in order to consume the fruits. But if you do it before, I don't know what I just said, Elul, Tishrei, I think I'm getting confused, but the Rosh Hashanah is Tishrei, so make sure that you plant the vines before Tishrei, so that when Tishrei comes, it's already considered year 2. Very, very interesting strategy. Okay, V'li Yerakis, also for Meiser of vegetables, Be'ech Zeu. Okay, very nice. Be'echad B'Shvat, Rosh Hashanah L'Ilan Kedivir Beishamai, Beisil Om B'Chamisha Asabo. 2 B'Shvat. So Beishamai says that the first day of Shvat is the Rosh Hashanah for trees, also for Meiser from fruits of trees. So that is defined by the Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanos, the Rosh Hashanah for trees. Beis Shammai says that is the first day of Shvat. Beis Hillel says that is the 15th day, the Tesvav, the 2 of Shvat, 2 b'Shvat. So Beis Hillel says that the Rosh Hashanah for trees is the 15th day of Shvat. Friends, that was the first Mishnah of Masechta Rosh Hashanah. Says the Gemara, Limlochim lemai hilchisa. Ha ha. Friends, when we say that the first day of Nisan is Rosh Hashanah for kings, why is that significant? So Amar Rav Chizde says, Rav Chizde l'shtaris, for documents. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, shtarei chov hamukdamin psulin v'hamucharin ksherin. Wow. When you have a shtar chov, that is a document that is documenting that Ruvain lent money to Shimon. So if it's mukdamin, it's psulin v'amucharin ksherin. If they're early, then they're pasul. If they're late, then they're kosher. Okay, I had mentioned in the before we started that there's there's one line here, and it's kind of like an iceberg. So here it is. So we're saying that Rosh Hashanah for kings is the first day of Nisan, and we're saying, why is that important? It's important for documents. Okay, fine. So the simple explanation of this is that, well, they would date their documents based on the year of the king, right? So as Rashi gives one example, in Kislev of the 3rd year of a certain king, such and such happened. So in order to know when the year of the king starts, so when does it start? Does it start whenever he started? Or does it start on a concrete time every year? So we say that it starts at a concrete time every year, which is Nisan. And just like we said by the vineyard, that if you plant your grapes in Elul, comes Tishrei, you're already in year 2 because Tishrei is the cutoff. The same thing for kings. If a king starts his rule in Adar, comes Nisan the next month, he's already in year 2. Now, what's the nafkamina over here? The nafkamina is for shtaris hamukdamin v'hamucharin. To understand what this means, so we have to call over our friends Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. And what's happening with Reuven, Shimon, and Levi is that Reuven lends Shimon $1,000. Okay? Shimon has a field. Okay? If Shimon doesn't pay back the $1,000 to Reuven, so Reuven has the rights to that field. Okay? Shimon sells that field to Levi. Okay? Reuven now goes to Levi and says, Levi, look, I have a document here that says that Shimon owes me $1,000. I'm sorry, buddy, but Shimon had no right to sell you that field. The field belongs to me since Shimon didn't pay me back. Okay? Now, here's the thing. We have to make sure that the document is valid, that the document is accurate. What's the date on the document? Because, of course, if Levi purchased the field from Shimon before this loan happened, well, then it's fair and square. Shimon didn't own the field at the time that he borrowed money from Reuven. So Reuven has no right to go to Levi and ask for the field. Levi bought the field from Shimon before Shimon borrowed money from Reuven. At the time that Shimon borrowed money from Reuven, he didn't own that field. So therefore, Reuven is unable to go to Levi to ask for the field. But if Reuven lent money to Shimon before he sold the field to Levi, well then at the time that Shimon borrowed money from Reuven, Shimon owned this field, and Reuven has the rights to collect the field if Shimon doesn't pay him back. And when Shimon then sells it to Levi, well, he didn't have the right to sell it to Levi while there was still a lien on it from Reuven. And therefore Reuven can go to Levi and say, hey, Shimon had no right to sell you that field because he owes me money. So therefore it's important for us to know when the loan happened, if it was before the land sale or if it was after. Okay. Now, going a little bit deeper. So how does this tie in? Well, here's the case with the loan and the document. The case is as follows. Shimon goes to two witnesses with a document. The document says that he, Shimon, borrowed money from Reuven in Kislev of the 3rd year of the reign of a particular king. Okay. Now, the witnesses did not see that Shimon borrowed money from Reuven, but Shimon comes with the document that says, look, I need you guys to sign that I borrowed money from Reuven. He's admitting that he borrowed money. He's saying, look, just sign here so that I can give this document to Reuven. I can get the money that I need. Reuven has this document to come and claim it. So there's no issues over here. They signed the document that says that as of Kislev of the 3rd year of the reign of a certain king, Shimon owes Reuven money. But again, they did not see that Shimon actually borrowed money from Reuven. Now, they do see in Tammuz of the 3rd year of the reign of this particular king that Shimon borrowed money from Reuven. So now there's two things. On the one hand, they have signed a document that says that in Kislev of the 3rd year of this king, Shimon borrowed money from Reuven, but they saw with their own eyes that in Tammuz of the 3rd year of this, the reign of this king, Shimon borrowed money from Reuven. So the question is Tammuz before Kislev, which means that the document is post-dated, so it's a shtar me'ucher, which is kosher, because by post-dating the document, it's not going to help him chop the field from Levi. I mean, if he wants to chop the field from Levi, he's going to want to argue that the loan happened earlier. So now, if Kislev, which is the date written in the document, is before Tammuz, well, then that means that the document was written earlier than the actual loan took place later on in Tammuz, which makes it a shtar mukdam, an early document, which would enable Reuven to claim, to potentially claim that field from Levi arguing that at the time that Levi had purchased the field, Reuven had already lent the money, even though it's not true because he had only lent the money later on in Tammuz. So therefore, we have to understand when did the reign of this king start so that we can understand exactly the date that we're talking about in the document. So if we go based on, well, it just depends when the reign of the king started, well then, if the document says that the loan happened in Kislev, okay, and the Kislev Teves, but the king only came to power in Teves, well then, which comes first? Tevet, Shvat, Adar, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz is going to come first, which is when the loan actually happened. Av, Elul, Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev comes after that, which means that it's a shtar me'ucher, right? Right? If the king became, I don't even know what I said anymore. What was it? Kislev Teves, right? I don't even know where I am anymore. But basically, the point is that, so depending on when the king started his kingship, Kislev could either be before Tammuz or after Tammuz, right? So let's try to do this again. So basically, the document says that the loan happened in Kislev. So now, if the king came to rule in the next month, which is Teves, so that means that Tammuz, right, then that essentially means that Kislev is the last year of that, the last month of that year, which means that Tammuz comes before Kislev, which means that the document, which is for Kislev, is a shtar me'ucher, which would be okay. But if the king came to power, let's say, the month after the loan actually took place, which is Av, the loan actually took place in Tammuz, and he came to power in Av, which means that Tammuz is the last month of his, the year that the time that the king came to power. So that means that Kislev, which is the date in the document, is before the actual loan, which is in Tammuz, and therefore it would be a shtar mukdam, which we're saying is pasul. So if we go by a subjective date, so then we don't know how to understand if it's a shtar mukdam or a shtar ma'ucher. However, if we simply say that the year of a king always starts on Nisan, problem solved. Because now we know that the year begins in Nisan. So Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, which means that Tammuz of the third year preceded Kislev of the third year. And therefore that would make this a shtar me'ucher, right? Because Tammuz is when the loan actually happened, and then Kislev happens after that. So that would make it a shtar me'ucher, because the date in the document was Kislev. The loan actually happened earlier in Tammuz, so we know it's a shtar me'ucher and it's kosher. So that's a very long-winded way of understanding why it's important to note that the year of the king is always from Nisan, so that if we have two events, one being a document that says Kislev of the third year of the reign of a certain king, and testimony that a loan happened in Tammuz of the third year of the reign of a particular king, well, we know that Tammuz was before Kislev, and that makes it a shtar me'ucher, and it's a kosher shtar. But if we wouldn't have that objective date, so then we wouldn't really be able to know what was first and what was second. Is it a shtar me'ucher, which is kosher, or shtar mukdam, which is pasul? Wow, that was a little bit of brain spaghetti. I think we're going to have a whole bunch of brain spaghetti for a little bit, but actually the rest of the daf today is actually kind of smooth sailing. Okay, so let's read that again. So, asks the Gemara, how come it's important to know that the Rosh Hashanah for kings is from Nisan? So Amar Rav Chizda l'shtaris, Rav Chizda says, well, for documents, ditnan, as we learned in the Mishnah, shtari chov, that when it comes to documents, such as a document that says that Shimon owes Reuven $1,000, hamugdamin psulin, well, if it's an early document, right, a document that has a date that is dated earlier than the actual transaction took place, So psulin, those do not work, because then Reuven could use that document to improperly take a field away from Levi. But if the document is for a later date than the actual transaction happened, it'll be kosher, because the Reuven is unable to use that document to take a field wrongfully from Levi. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Melech she'amad be'esrim v'tisha be'adar, a king who came to rule on the 29th day of Adar, came shegia echad b'Nisan, once the first of Nisan comes, first of Nisan, of course, being the Rosh Chodesh, Rosh Hashanah for kings. So he became king essentially the day before Rosh Hashanah, also Lo Shana. So it counts as though this is now his second year, right? That one day that he chapped the Rhine in the previous year counts as an entire year, and the first day of Nisan, i.e. the next day, it becomes the second year of his rule. And if he only becomes king on the first day of Nisan, well, ein monin lo shana ad shegia Nisan acher, well, it's now only going to be a complete year, comes the next Nisan in a year from now. So if he would have become the king the day before, on the last day of the previous year, so then already on the first day of Nisan, he's already up to year 2. But if he only becomes king on the first day of Nisan, he has to wait an entire year till the first day of the next year, first day of Nisan of the next year. Only at that point does he begin year 2. Okay? Omer Mai, we said earlier, Melech she'amad be'esrim v'tisha be'adar, that a king, right, we just said that a king who becomes king on the 29th day of Adar, kivin shegia echad b'Nisan, comes the next day, the first day of Nisan, also Lo Shana, it counts as though he was already king for a full year, and now this is the beginning of the second year of his reign. Hakamash Malon, this is coming to teach us the Nisan Rosh Hashanah l'Melachim, that Nisan is objectively the Rosh Hashanah for kings, V'yom echad b'Hashanah chashuv shana, and that one day in a year is already enough to be considered an entire year. So the fact that he became king on the last day of Adar comes the first day of Nisan. It's as though that one day was the equivalent of an entire year. Comes the first day of Nisan, we're already on year 2. Okay. And the Bryce had continued and said that if he only became king on the first day of Nisan, so it's only going to be a complete year once the next Nisan comes around in a year from now. Pshita, isn't this obvious? If we're saying that Rosh Hashanah for kings is the first day of Nisan, so then Mimele, if he becomes king on the first day of Nisan, so it's only going to be another year until he's going to have to wait a full year until it becomes a second year. So tzricha de imnu ale me Adar. Okay, so the chiddush is, for even in a situation when already the previous month in Adar, they had decided, okay, it's decided that this fellow is going to be the next king, but technically speaking, they only coronated, I think that's a word, him as king in Nisan. So Ma'udetema may have thought to say, Nimnu le tartan shnin kamash malana. May have thought to say, look, the Maise, if they already decided from the previous year, they already decided in Adar that he's going to be the next king. So I may have thought to say that since they already decided in Adar, maybe we could already start counting that as though he became king in Adar. No. He becomes king when he becomes king, and if that's in Nisan, so then the year that he becomes king really only starts that Nisan, and year 2 will be a year later than that, even though they already decided a month earlier that he was going to be king. Taner Rabbanan, the rabbis taught Meis be'Adar v'Amad Acher Tachtav be'Adar. Okay, so if the first king, if Reuven the king died in Adar, which is the last month of the year, and Shimon the king becomes king in Adar, in the same month. So basically, in the same year, there are 2 kings. Monin Shana Laze v'Laze. So then if you're writing a document, you can either say year X of Reuven the king, or you could say year 1 of Shimon the king, and it's the same year. Meis b'Nisan v'Amad Acher Tachtav b'Nisan. If Reuven the king dies in Nisan, and Shimon the king becomes king in Nisan. So Monin Shana Laze Velaze. So again, if you're writing a document, you can write a document year X of Reuven the king or year 1 of Shimon the king. If Reuven the king dies in Adar and Shimon the king is coronated in Nisan, well then, Monin Rishona La Rishon, so then if you have a document from Adar, so then you can only use year X of Reuven the king, Vishnia Lasheni, and if you have a document from Nisan, so then you write year 1 of Shimon the king, and that's that. Because you had a clean break at Nisan. Omar Mai, we said earlier, Meis be'odar, v'amar acher tachtav be'odar. If Reuven the king dies in Adar and Shimon the king becomes king in Adar as well, Monin shana laze v'laze, you can use either one in dating documents. You can say year X to Reuven the king or year 1 to Shimon the king. Pshita, isn't this obvious? Well, I may have thought to say that we can't have a situation where you have 1 year that can be attributed 2 ways. We can't have a situation where some documents say year 1 to Shimon the king and other documents say year X to Reuven the king. So Kamash Malan, that we can, it's fine. If Reuven the king dies in a certain year and Shimon the king becomes king that same year, documents can either say year X to Reuven the king or year 1 to Shimon the king, and that's acceptable. If Reuven the king died in Nisan and Shimon the king becomes king in Nisan, Monin Shana Laze Velaze. So also we're saying that on documents you can either say year X to Reuven the king or year 1 to Shimon the king. Pshita, isn't that obvious? We just established that it works when he dies in Adar. Shouldn't it be the same thing for Nisan? Ma'adatema, I may have thought to say, I may have thought to say that when we say that 1 day in a year can be considered like an entire year, i.e. that when Shimon the king becomes king in Adar, comes Nisan, we already treat it as though it's his second year. That is at the end of the year, right? So Kilu, if Shimon the king became king at the end of the year, and he completes the year, even though it wasn't a full year, but comes the end of that year, even though it was only part of a year, even though maybe it could have only been 1 day, it could already be considered a full year. But maybe I'll say that at the end of the year, when you completed the year, even though it was less than a year. But if Reuven the king dies 1 day into Nisan of that year, maybe I would not consider that to be a full year. He didn't complete the year after all. He started it but didn't finish it. Maybe that would not work. Maybe when we say that 1 day can be considered a whole year, that's 1 day at the end of the year when you complete the year. So we give you credit for the whole year. But if you only made it 1 day into the year and then, gestorben, so then maybe we wouldn't consider that to be a whole year. Kamash Milan, that's not true. It works on both ends. And therefore, if Reuven the king was king even for 1 day into Nisan, and then Shimon the king becomes king also in Nisan, so we can count in documents either year X to Reuven the king or year 1 to Shimon the king. So again, Ma'odetema may have thought to say, then when we say that 1 day in a year is considered a whole year, Besov Shana, I may have thought to say that only works at the end of the year. I may have thought to say that at the beginning of the year, we do not say that 1 day can be considered like an entire year. Kamash Malan, that it works both at the beginning and at the end of the year. If Reuven the king dies in Adar and Shimon the king becomes king in Nisan, so then Monin Rishona L'Rishon V'Shniya L'Sheni. So in that case, any document from Adar of the first year is counted, is dated by year X of Reuven the king, and any document from Nisan of the next year is going to be dated year 1 of Shimon the king, and that is that. Pshita, isn't that obvious? Lo tzricha de imnu ole mi Adar umelech ben melech hu. So the Gemara answers that we're talking about a situation where already from Adar, even though Shimon the king only became king in Nisan, but already from the month before and the year before in Adar, they had decided that Shimon the king was going to become king. And additionally, because we already know that from earlier, that even though, right, we had said earlier in the daf that even though they decided in Adar that he was going to be king, still it doesn't count until the next year. But additionally in this case, in addition to the fact that they already decided in Adar that he was going to be king, he is also the son of the previous king. So that's like another thing going for him. As Rashi says, Lefi Shamalchus Yerushahi, the kingship is actually an inherited position. And therefore, Ki'ilu, already from Adar, they knew that he was going to be king. He's the son of the previous king. I may have thought to say, okay, we could already count from Adar that he was king. Kamash Malon. No, we don't say that. Rather, only when he actually becomes king in Nisan can we start dating things from his reign. And therefore, anything from Adar will go by year X of Reuben the king. Anything from Nisan will be year 1 of Shimon the king. Friends, we got a bunch of stuff still to do on Bezim and Bez, but I'm going to stop here because what we start over here really is going to continue for quite a while. There isn't really an amazing stopping point. We'll stop here for now. I think we have enough to think about for now. Just getting started on Rosh Hashanah. Friends, what do we learn about on the first half of Rosh Hashanah? We have a Mishnah that listed the 4 Rosh Hashanahs that we have throughout the year. Can anybody name them for me? The first one is the first of Nisan, which is Rosh Hashanah for kings and for the holidays. Then there is the first of Elul, which is the Rosh Hashanah for Meiser Behema. Reb Shimon and Reb Elazar say it's actually the first of Tishrei. Then we get to the first of Tishrei, which we said is the Rosh Hashanah for years, as well as for Shemitah and Yovel, for Orla, and for Meiser of vegetables. And then, of course, Machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel regarding the first of Shvat or Tu B'Shvat for Rosh Hashanah for trees, which is essentially for the Meiser of trees. We then got involved in trying to understand what's the significance of Rosh Hashanah for kings being in Nisan. And we said, well, the big difference is in terms of documents. That when we date documents, we date it to the year of a particular king, and we need to have an objective date that reign starts, so that when we see 2 dates from the year of year 3 of, for example, of a particular king, we know which one was first and which one is second, because we know that it's going to be relative to Nisan and not just relative to whenever he started being a ruler, and we may not know when that is, which can be confusing. Givaldig. And okay. Fine. Now we had talked about different scenarios, right? That if Reuven the king dies in Adar and Shimon the king takes his place in Adar, so then you could date the documents from both years. The same thing also, meaning either year X to Reuven the king or year 1 of Shimon the king. Same thing would apply as well if Reuven the king died in Nisan and Shimon the king took over in Nisan. Okay. Givaldig. Fine. We said if Reuven the king dies in 1 year and Shimon the king only becomes ruler the next year, so then after Nisan, documents from before that year would be from Reuven the king, from the next year would be from Shimon the king. Okay, friends, I hope you enjoyed Daf Beis of Masechta Rosh Hashanah, and I hope you enjoy your day. Peace out.